Geoff Cruickshank is a security consultant, engineer and researcher based in Darwin in the Northern Territory of Australia. He earned his bachelor's degree in information technology and he won the School of Engineers Award for outstanding academic achievement along the way. He has certificates in hydrocarbon process plant management, security and risk management, and diesel mechanics. He is a keen security consultant, alternative propulsion systems researcher, and he's also very interested in the UFO phenomenon, and he's here to discuss the latest developments concerning classified UFO files that have been released concerning the Kennedy assassination.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Michael.
Great to have you on the show. Anything you need to add to that very short intro I did there?
That's pretty much it. Interested as a hydro processing personally, liquefied natural gas. They're the main propulsion fuels for both SpaceX and Blue Origin now, so I'm interested in developing methods to produce liquefied natural gas on Mars for the return journey of the man or human Mars missions, because it's very nature. You can't take it with you because it boils, doesn't become a liquid, doesn't stay a liquid for very long. So yeah, that's part of my research. Propulsion, and of course any electrogravitics that could eliminate the need to take fuel with you would be a bonus.
Okay, so you have a very distinct pedigree as an electrical engineer and having done a lot of security and risk management work. So what got you interested in the UFO field?
I've been interested since I was a boy. My father built me a reflecting telescope when I was about 10 years old, and so I had a good grasp of the size of the universe from a very young age. So the trillions of stars, trillions of galaxies make it a statistical impossibility for humans to be the only intelligent life in the universe. So straight off the bat, I knew there are other life forms out there. And I also was interested in Robert Ballard's research in the late 70s, where he discovered life forms living on the Galapagos Trench that did not use photosynthesis, they used chemosynthesis. So that negates the need for a planet to be a certain distance from a star to produce life. It's independent of light. It uses the chemistry of the geothermal vents to produce organic matter, which is food. So that opens up the possible life throughout the universe.
Now, you're an Australian-based researcher. So what happened in Australia or the US that kind of like caught your attention that this UFO phenomenon is something real and you needed to dive into it?
Particularly from Foo Fighters days in World War II, humans, some of the Bible writings and the religious texts obviously describe UFOs to their primitive thinking of vehicles. Ezekiel's eyes in the wheels and that type of thing was just, people 2,000 or 3,000 years ago trying to describe in things that they knew what they were seeing, and wrote it down in religious texts. Basically throughout human history, it's documented that we've had visitors from either other planets in our solar system or interstellar visitors.
Well, in the last few years, you spent quite a bit of time going through the declassified Kennedy assassination files, and you found some very interesting documents that really show how important the UFO issue was in the Kennedy assassination. So you want to kind of like tell us, how that unfolded for you, or what got you interested in Kennedy and UFOs, and what documents you found?
Actually, it was your writings, 2007 and 2010, about the connection between JFK and the UFO subject that got me into it, Michael. So,
Oh, okay.
JFK, after he left the Navy in 1945, he tagged along with the Secretary of the Navy at the time, James Forrestal, into Nazi Germany in 1945 because there was a rush to get that technology. The British, the Russians, the Americans were all racing towards Berlin to get their hands on the goods. JFK was one of them. So he knew early on, before he even got into politics, that there was something to these Foo Fighters and some of the things that were reported by both sides too. And I believe Stuart Symington was the Secretary of the Air Force. He actually briefed Kennedy when he was a congressman, 1947, just after Roswell occurred, about what had happened. He knew going into the presidency that you were an actual thing.
Yeah, Kennedy's relationship with James Forrestal, the Secretary of the Navy, he took him to Germany and then became the first Secretary of Defense in 1947, was particularly close. And Forrestal, as we know from various leaked documents, was a very prominent member of the control group that is today widely known as MJ12. So, what do you think Forrestal told Kennedy?
Well, there's a very poignant photo of President Kennedy visiting James Forrestal's grave. Forrestal was a religious person, highly religious, and some of the things they found, not only in Roswell, but in particular the Aztec crash, where apparently they found dissected human bodies. That probably sent Forrestal over the edge. And Stuart Symington was also rumoured to be one of the Majestic 12, the original Majestic 12. And Stuart Symington, I think, was the one that informed Forrestal. He went for a drive in a limousine back to Forrestal's house. And that shortly after that time, Symington told Forrestal something, and that's what put Forrestal in the asylum, that whatever that news was. So, yeah, it's a very shocking sort of a thing for, the Wrights had only, a powered flight in 1903, and in 1947 you've got these interplanetary craft visiting the Earth. It's mind-shattering to some people.
Yeah, I kind of like in my book, Kennedy's Last Stand, I talked about President Kennedy, or at the time he was just a young congressman, and he saw what happened to James Forrestal, and I'm sure he was aware that Forrestal was unhappy with the secrecy system. So I wonder what do you think the effect was to watch his kind of mentor, one of his first mentors, James Forrestal, kind of die in such mysterious circumstances that, allegedly was a suicide, but I think, evidence suggests otherwise.
Yeah, well, obviously, give Kennedy a bit of a heads up why the stakes were. This was life or death stuff, and the stakes were extremely high. America was at top of the heap after World War II, and they wanted to stay there. If it was confirmed that was a interstellar or interplanetary, it was a higher authority than the United States, their world domination would have affected that world domination thing that they had going at the time. So that secret, I believe Oppenheimer and all the other scientists, Vannevar Bush, they possibly wanted to share their discoveries with the rest of the scientific world, and the military-industrial complex did not want that. And, that's why Eisenhower warned against the military-industrial complex at the termination of his second term as president.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Kennedy became a senator. I mean, he started off as a congressman and then he became a senator. I think he won office in 1952. And at that time, the UFO issue was kind of wrapped up under something called the Psychological Strategy Board and the Operations Coordination Board, that were these programs within these entities within the National Security Council that really managed the UFO issue, but using kind of like the Cold War psychological operations as the official cover. So, yeah, you want to kind of fill us in about how psychological warfare was, how they really conducted their UFO programs.
So obviously both sides in the Cold War knew of the visitors, or whatever they would like to call them. There was a show of force over Washington, D.C. on 2 consecutive weekends in 1952, just to sort of assert domination by whoever were operating those craft, to say, look, we're in charge here. So the Americans wanted to utilize the ambiguity, the UFO reality, against the Russians, and that's where a guy named David Lamar Christ comes into the picture. He was the first applied scientist. He was an applied physics scientist. He was the first one that the CIA employed in 1980. And from the documentation found, I believe he was involved in a reverse engineering project called Majestic Jehovah, and he was also involved in the psychological warfare of it later became known as the Palladium Project, where he developed a system where they could record the radar of the Soviet radar system, and they had a base on the Caspian Sea in Iran where they were recording the radar reflections and then playing them back into the Soviets, basically messing with their heads, because they'd think there was an object. Radar were picking up an object, and when they'd sent fighters up to investigate, there's nothing there. That became part of what was called the Single Integrated Operating Plan, which is they realised early on that the US Army having nuclear weapons, the US Navy having nuclear weapons, and the US Air Force has it, there was probably doubling up of targets. So the Single Integrated Operating Plan was a mechanism to evenly distribute the targets for the 3 forces, the nuclear forces. So they weren't wasting nuclear weapons. That project that was called Palladium, where they're injecting UFO type signals into the Soviet radar, was a method to deliver nuclear weapons to the target, because I see when he came into the picture around 1961, 1962, the main mechanism for delivery of nuclear weapons in the late 1950s was still the bomber under General Curtis LeMay's Strategic Air Command. So, the UFO psychological warfare thing was a cornerstone of their nuclear weapons planning.
So this Dave Christ, he seems to play a role in getting the Russians informed about what the US was doing as far as psychological warfare and this Palladium program. So, you want to explain how that happened after he got captured in Cuba on some covert operation?
Yes, he foolishly volunteered for a particular job in Havana, and it was part of the ZR program, which was later to become famous as the ZR rifle. That was one of the compartments. We're still not sure what he was actually doing there, because his security personnel file, his day remains, there's 380 pages in his personnel security file from the CIA, and over half of that document is still classified under the National Security Act of 1947 and the CIA Act of 1949. So after all this time, his movements and the stuff he was briefed into is still highly classified. And that brings us to the document that I just located the other day. If you could bring that one up. The
Project Jehovah?
Yep.
Okay, there we go.
So this, I believe, is what is known as a bigot list. Now, a bigot list is a list of people that have appropriate clearances, but more importantly, appropriate need to know for a specific compartment. Now, this document was originally heavily redacted. There's 85 people on there, and in 1993, with all but 6 people's names redacted. So you couldn't really make much about it. And I've highlighted the key players. Only one of those, or 2 of those people, their names were released in the 1993 release. That was Dave Christ and Thomas Karamessinis, who he was heavily involved in the CIA. He's quite well known in the JFK circles. Tom Karamessinis was the Deputy Director of Plans that took over from Richard Helms when Helms became DCI. So when that document came out in 1993, it didn't make much, it had no reference to who the other people were. But for some reason, this document got released in 2025 in April as part of the JFK assassination files. And the strange thing is, there must be 100,000 JFK assassination files released. Every single one of them has what's called a cover page with the JFK assassination system ID form. It's got the date, the agency, the record number, the record series. Every single one of them has this cover page except this document. And I believe this document is a bigot list for the Majestic Jehovah reverse engineering program, because these people aren't CIA. There's a guy there, Jathrup, who was working with Lockheed Martin. He was an aerospace engineer. That's all he did. There was generals, General Tarnley and General McClellan, General McVeigh, specialist, communications specialist after he left the Major General. Tarnley was a logisticist. And there's also Archibald Roosevelt, who was President FDR's 5th son, and he was also a military officer and entrepreneur. So there's a really disparate group of people here from the military, from the industry, and from the CIA agents, and all their clearances are post 1947. So I believe this is actually a list of people who were briefed into the reverse engineering program. They weren't part of Majestic 12 because Majestic 12 was the directors, if you like, of that organisation. These are the actual workers that were involved. And that became a problem when Dave arrested in Havana, because he got tortured by Castro's military personnel, and they extracted information about the reverse engineering program and the Palladium program, injecting false signals into the radar system. And then Castro forwarded that on to President Nikita Khrushchev. So one of Dave Christ's subordinates was a guy named McCord, who became famous later on as the Watergate burglar. But James McCord was actually he was planning a jailbreak of Dave Christ during the Bay of Pigs, and it's possible that the Bay of Pigs was actually a diversion jailbreak. The CIA denied it to the Church Committee that McCord was planning jailbreak operations, but then a document was found in the Church Committee, and they had to backpedal and admit that McCord did plan to break Dave Christ out of jail for the Bay of Pigs. And because as everyone knows, the air cover didn't arrive for the Bay of Pigs. It failed. And Richard Bissell at the time was the Deputy Director of Plans for the CIA. He stated later in his, he believed that Curtis LeMay, the Air Force at the time, deliberately didn't provide air cover because Bissell was a big rival to LeMay, because LeMay wanted both the U-2 and the Project Oxcart vehicles for himself. He didn't want CIA to have them. So Dave Christ, he languished in prison for 2.5 years. His cover name was Daniel Carswell. That's what he was arrested under. And that name pops up again, assassination, as one of the 3 tramps. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But so that's the background to these documents. In the lead up to the conference in Vienna in June 1961 with Nikita Khrushchev and President Kennedy, Khrushchev's got all this background information about what the CIA is doing and the reverse engineering program. Kennedy knows nothing about it. And in the documents, the record of conversation of that meeting, Khrushchev warns Kennedy and says, you need to stop fooling around, because if misunderstandings or relations, it could turn to an all-out nuclear war. Kennedy, of course, didn't know what he was referring to. So if you could bring up that other document, the main one that's 15 pages. Yeah, that one. So this here is Kennedy is the director of Central Intelligence, which is Alan Dulles.
Can I just
on Wednesday, the 28th of June?
I just wanted to interject here the importance of the dates, because Kennedy became president in January of 1961, but it wasn't until June that he made his kind of like effort to get into or find out about the UFO issue. And so people, and I've wondered myself, why did it take Kennedy so long if Eisenhower had warned him about what was going on? What you've described gives us an idea now, a background that it was this meeting in Vienna that was what got Kennedy kind of looking into this whole MJ-12 psychological warfare connection. So I thought that was important.
Yeah, that's correct. That's, although, Khrushchev was a seasoned diplomat and Kennedy was fairly green, I think Khrushchev generally thought that Kennedy did not know about what the CIA were doing and his military. President got a guy named General Maxwell Taylor to be his military advisor, and that was unusual, because that's usually the role of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is usually their trusted military advisor. But Kennedy didn't do that, possibly because he didn't trust the military. He had Operation Northwoods with General Lemnitzer, wanted to do a false flag operation, and Kennedy just thought that was insane. So he had good reason not to trust the military at the time. So when Kennedy gets back from the Vienna conference, he wants to know what the hell's going on. So he prepares a meeting with us. This document was only declassified in 2022. So some of the majestic documents refer to this date that, in as the 28th of June as an important date. Now, if they were fake, that'd be an amazing guess to guess that was the day that Kennedy summons Dulles, and that it was twice in one day that Dulles met President Kennedy. At 12 o'clock there was a general meeting, but at 3:30 there was a meeting with only people in it. And what I've also discovered is there was a guy named J. Patrick Coyne who was a national security advisor, but he was also national security advisor during the Truman administration and the Eisenhower administration. So he was very well acquainted with Alan Dulles, one of his cronies. So at 11 o'clock on the 28th of June, Pat Coyne has a meeting with Alan Dulles for some reason. And I believe that Coyne is giving Dulles a heads up about what Kennedy's going to ask him. He's going to ask him about MJ12. So Pat Coyne goes to see him, tells him what's up. So Dulles is prepared when he walks into that meeting. So if you just scroll to the next page, this is Evelyn Lincoln's papers. Evelyn Lincoln was the personal assistant of President Kennedy. Her papers were part of her private collection until she handed them over to the JFK Library in July 1997. You can see the meeting for Alan Dulles as the main off-the-record meeting, and Patrick Coyne is there as well. Maxwell Taylor, his military advisor, national security expert McDoy, and Ralph Dungan was a special advisor to the president. So that was that meeting on the 28th, the same meeting. If you just scroll to the next page. So this is what they call the terse memo. There's a majestic document issued in 1995. So it was before Evelyn Lincoln's papers came out or Alan Dulles' calendar came out. So it picks that date, June 28, 1961. The director, National Central Intelligence Agency, a review of MJ12 intelligence operations as they relate to Cold War psychological plans. That's palladium. That's what that's referencing. And palladium was so highly classified that only a handful of people knew that it acted up until 2003. So this document surfaced 8 years before that was even known about. So if this document is a hoax, that person must have had access to, must have been one of those handful of people that knew about it.
So it's reasonable to conclude then that this document, which was, as you said, leaked, and there's always been dispute as to whether it's authentic or not. It's part of the leaked majestic documents that have been controversial from from the very beginning. When they came out, that the diary entries that you found that date back 8 years later, that they corroborate this. So they corroborate the date.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, because, of all the days to pick, they've somehow managed to pick that day. And it ties in with Kennedy coming back from Vienna, demanding from Alan Dulles what the hell's going on with this Majestic 12, like it could bring him to the point of nuclear war rather quickly if it was, the Soviets think that they're Curtis LeMay, because Curtis LeMay famously tried to provoke the Russians several times with his home run. They'd run bombers right up to the border of the Soviet Union and suddenly turn around and swing back. And there was a 17-1 advantage the Americans had against the Soviets at that time. So if there was any time in history where they'd have an advantage, it was then. And LeMay knew that. Kennedy despised LeMay, but he also knew that the Soviets were scared of LeMay. So that's why he made him Chief of the Air Force, because that was if it did turn pear-shaped, you'd want someone like LeMay on your side anyway, basically. It was a double-edged sword.
So it was like the good cop, bad cop in dealing with the Russians. Kennedy would be the good cop, and he'd turn LeMay loose as the bad cop if he wanted the Soviets to back down on anything.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. So if you just scroll up to the next document. So this is what's known as the burned memo. This is a pretty important document, and I believe the person that gave this to Timothy Cooper, who was the original custodian, was a guy named Muller. He was James Angleton, head of counterintelligence, his right-hand man, and there's many things that point to Myler actually being the one that pulled this document out of the fire and preserved it for posterity.
Maybe
So you see,
Geoff, maybe just give people a little bit of background as to why these were pulled from a fire and Geoff Myler's role in kind of saving these files from being destroyed. Why were they being destroyed?
because Richard Nixon and Richard Helms knew during Watergate that things were going to start to get investigated. So all the MJ12 documents and the MK Ultra documents. So MJ and MK were what's known as CIA cryptonyms of their compartments. And they wanted all evidence of the MK Ultra documents and the MJ12 documents destroyed because they could feel the walls moving in on them. Scotty Myler knew that the significance of these documents, and I guess a lot of them thought one day all this would come out in the open. It's reasonable to suggest that like people like Curtis LeMay had every reason. They were eligible buried at Arlington, but they did not ask to be buried at Arlington because they potentially knew one day their role in the assassination of President Kennedy would come out, and that would cause a big issue because people would have to be dug up out of Arlington. You know, that's where all the sacred ground for American service personnel, that would be a travesty. So to avoid embarrassing their country, Hamilton, LeMay and Allen did not get buried at Arlington National Cemetery, even though they were fully eligible to be. Myler knew the consequences, and at the time it was the United States' most vital secret was the alien presence, and probably not justifying it, but Myler probably wanted people to see the things that led up to Kennedy's assassination. It was quite obvious that Kennedy worked with the Soviet Union on the lunar landing and other outer space methods, as Navy SAM 271 points out. And the military-industrial complex doesn't exist if you don't have an enemy, basically. So that's why I believe he was assassinated.
So this draft set of directives was drafted by Alan Dulles, and he was circulating it to the executive committee of the Majestic 12 group. And maybe it's a little hard for the readers to read that section, but can you read it out? The actual paragraph where Dulles describes why Kennedy is a threat.
Yep. So these are all drafts, and the drafts is a draft doesn't get stored in the normal record file. CIA David Petraeus got caught with his emails. He was messaging his mistress, but he never sent them. He was just saving them as draft, and she could eat the drafts. That's an old trick, and that's what they did here. A lot of these documents are drafts because they never went into the official CIA record repository. And you'll see the watermark up in the top corner is CIA Counterintelligence. That's James Angleton. He was Director of Counterintelligence. And as you stated, that MJ1 is Alan Dulles, and it was circulated to the not all the Majestic 12. You'll see it's to Majestic 2, 7, I think, 4, 5, 6, and it says the context of the above has become necessary to review and evaluate a duplicate of field activities in light of the current situation, which means Kennedy's onto him. He's asking questions. I think this was written in around August, September 1961. So Kennedy's making inquiries. To eliminate this problem, I've drafted a new set of directives for your review and consideration. Please each draft on its own merit with the goal of finding acceptable solutions in which all can agree on. As you must know, Lancer, which is the Secret Service name for President John F. Kennedy, has made some inquiries regarding which we cannot allow. Please submit your views no later than October. Your actions to this matter is critical to the continuance of the group. So, yeah, he's circulating this document in
Why was October
August or
important?
September.
And why was October?
Because in that first memo that JFK had given Dulles, he wanted a report on MJ12 activities, and Dulles dragged it out until November. So I think Dulles knew what the consequences are of the report were going to be. He was going to get fired because he was not going to tell me anything. So that's why he set a deadline of October. And there's a few pages to this document, but I'll just add the most important one, the next page. You'll see a list of directives there. Just there, it's President's eyes only, need to know. The DOD 5200.1 is that's the automatic rules, and so a lot of this stuff was not required to be declassified. Project Blue Book, we all know what Blue Book is. The freedom of information, ask for freedom of information about this sort of stuff, to deny it. The PSYOP one was an interesting one because it mentions Project Artichoke, Bluebird, and MK Ultra, which Dave Christ was involved with as well. The PSYOP side of things, which was Palladium, and Project Environment. I'm not sure what Project Environment was, but it had something to do with alien visitation. And you'll see it says there.
I was just going to say, as far as Project Environment is concerned, is that one of the later documents? Because I can comment a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. You'll see that it says, do not remove from safe authority of JJA, which is James Jesus Angleton. So, yeah, if you knew what Project Environment was, yeah, that's
sure. Well, I did some work with Dr. Robert Wood was the one who did the real analysis on Project Environment, which was the 8th directive, and it was it made a cryptic statement. It said when the environment in Washington is no longer conducive to growth, it must be wet. And Dr. Wood, he made the connection to Russian wet works. How this is how in the intelligence community, people are assassinated. It's called it's a wet program, and so Dr. Wood said that Project Environment was put in this cryptic language so that the secretaries typing this out wouldn't have a heart attack, realizing that this is an assassination directive, and that this is important because later on, as you will discuss, there's that that November 12 CIA that document to John McCone, the CIA director, on November 12, where the MJ directives are mentioned, that's a connection to this Project Environment.
Yep. So it's a political environment in Washington. Mm-hmm. That's what they're talking about, is it?
Yep.
Yeah. And that's actually that next page. If you scroll down, that's what that one says. Yeah. When conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment and Washington can no longer be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation, it should be wet. Yeah, wet works, assassination. So that's the directive, the MJ directive that is referenced a little bit later. This is August, September 1961. If you scroll up a little bit, one more page. This is Dulles' response to Kennedy's request in June. It's the 5th of November, 1961. Now, again, this document was received in 2000. S1, Scotty Myler. That's Angleton's right-hand man, and I've analysed Myler's handwriting with some of the cover letters that was delivered to Timothy Cooper, along with the burned memo, and that they're a match. I'm pretty sure, 99% sure, that source S1 is Scotty Myler, Newton Scotty Myler. This document here talks about areas, aircraft launch vehicles incorporating ELINT and SIGINT capabilities and balloon-borne decoys with ECM equipment. And that is definitely a part of Project Palladium. And that was not declassified when this document came. So again, if this was that person had to be briefed into Palladium, and there was only a handful of people that were. So that's what makes me think this document is genuine. And future psychological warfare plans are in the making for more sophisticated vehicles whose characteristics come very close to phenomena collected by the Air Force and NSA elements, authorizations in this area of intelligence, which again is Palladium. But if you scroll up a little bit more, Dulles delivers the bad news to President Kennedy and says, the remaining cases have been classified for security reasons are under review. For reasons of security, I cannot divulge pertinent data on some of the more sensitive aspects of MJ-12 activities, which are deemed properly classified under the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. So basically, he's telling Kennedy, you don't have a need, just drop it, basically. So, Kennedy's the president. He's the commander-in-chief. He fires Dulles 10 days later after this document was received. A lot of people say it was for the Bay of Pigs, but I definitely think it was this document that created that.
Yeah, this is significant for another reason, and this actually just was stated in the Age of Disclosure documentary that came out, that for ensuring a kind of higher standard of classification, that they classified all UFO-related programs that were run by the Legacy Group, as they describe it, under the Department of Energy. So, because the Department of Energy has more strict security protocols than the Department of Defense or the intelligence community. And here, it confirms that. It says that Dulles isn't going to release these UFO files to Kennedy because they're classified under the Atomic Energy Act properly, and as you said, Kennedy doesn't have need to know.
Yep. So that that puts Kennedy on a bad foot with Dulles and fires him immediately, but unfortunately replaced him with one of the other cronies in Dulles's area, which was John McCone. John McCone was formerly the chairperson of the Atomic Energy Commission from 1955 to 1960, and he leaked the story of the Israeli atomic weapons program to a journalist named John W. Finney, and that's described by Seymour Hersh in his book The Samson Option. Not really sure why McCone felt the need to disclose the Israeli weapons program, but I think it was because Dave Christ was involved and they were trying to get ahead of the story before the Soviets did, that the Israelis had nuclear weapons. McCone actually facilitated the theft of uranium from the NUMEC facility, which it was highly enriched uranium, which was used for a rocket program, the Nerva rocket. Normally, if you were trying to account for misplaced uranium, you'd have to associate it with a nuclear weapon because it gets destroyed. But with a rocket fuel, it's hard to account for that highly enriched uranium. So that's, I think, McCone spilled the beans, if you like, to the New York Times about the Israeli program just before Kennedy came into office, because Dave Christ was probably involved in that program too. And then, McCone gets selected somehow as Dulles' replacement. So it's the same big boys club, basically. And what happens after that is, I'll gone into other research here with the Bluegill Triple Prime shoot down, which was, atomic energy testing of high altitude nuclear weapons for anti-ballistic missile programs, where the footage shows something falling from the nuclear fireball, and myself, Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet and Karen Gallaudet, we found the ship logs of the ships that were involved in the recovery operation and the service records of the diver that was sent down to inspect the UFO, but they didn't tell him what he was looking at, so he suffered severe psychosis after that. And we've actually found his records, and we've got evidence that the US Navy actually adopted his records because he was awarded the Expeditionary Cuba Medal for the Cuban Missile Crisis, but he was apparently on leave for almost the entirety of that thing. So he wasn't entitled to that medal, but he got it according to his records. So, but the reason that was mainly the US Navy that recovered it, and because the CIA weren't involved in Operation Dominic almost at all, they'd lost control, and James Angleton was forced to brief Kennedy about the alien presence, if you like. So that got the cat out of the bag, basically.
Do you want to say something? I don't know if you were going to, but are you going to say something about the large cigar-shaped craft that crashed as a result of the triple prime nuclear test, and how Kennedy was trying to kind of leverage that to get access to the classified UFO files?
Yeah, because Angleton knew that if he didn't fess up to JFK, that would give Kennedy a reason to completely destroy the CIA, which is what he claimed he wanted to do, spread ashes to the wind. So it forced Angleton into a corner. He had to secretly brief Kennedy about the UFO reality. And this is there's a document called the Important Memo, and that was written by Scotty Myler. And he says in the document that the CIA were forced to brief Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, because that's when Bluegill Triple Prime happened, at the peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's what Tom DeLonge and all those have spoken about, the shoot down. And Joe Rogan had Dan Farrar on Friday, and they spoke about the ability of weapons to shoot down UFOs. So, yeah, that's how Kennedy was. They had about MJ-12 and the alien reality. So, and it possibly defused the whole Cuban Missile Crisis as well. It started, Kennedy and Khrushchev started communicating through back-channel comms, through Norman Cousins, I think it was, used to send letters. And then Kennedy had the hotline installed in the Oval Office. Now, there wasn't a telephone at that time, it was a telex. So it was when you see an exchange of the conversation, telex exchanges over a period of hours. So that started Kennedy thinking about working with the Soviet Union. And there's a document, the Basic National Security Planning document in May of 1963, where Kennedy gets a team together to talk about a joint lunar landing with the Soviet Union. And that document also mentions the possibility of alien species in the solar system, but sort of discounts, says there's no evidence of alien life forms in our solar system. And one of the people in that board was he was handpicked by President Kennedy. His name was Maxwell S. Hunter II. He was a former Dougcraft Corporation missile. He developed the Thor missiles, which were part of Bluegill Triple Prime. So because it was called Bluegill Triple Prime because they'd had 3 previous attempts at launching that warhead in space, and it had failed 3 times. They thought it might have been the missile, and the 4th time the triple prime was the successful test. So Maxwell Hunter knew about the problems with the Thor, and he probably knew about the shoot down of triple prime. He was at one of the basic national security planning meeting, and he didn't agree with the conclusion they had about alien life form. So he wrote another letter to Kennedy's national security advisor and said, actually, you know what? We possibly have found life forms, and went into a big discourse on why it was still possible there was life forms in the solar system. So Kennedy was quite clearly moving to a joint venture with the Soviet Union on both lunar missions and, as NASAM 271 states, certain matters on outer space. So, and that's NASAM 271 on November 12th, 1963. So it's only 10 days out of the assassination. That wouldn't have been time to get the team together. That's not true. They knew for months in advance that's what Kennedy planned to do. He only formalised 12th of November. So that's basically what that National Security Memorandum says, which was declassified in 2002.
And it's important to emphasise here that this particular document is an official document that was declassified, and it supports some of the other documents that you're going to be talking about that were leaked, that haven't yet been officially declassified.
Yeah. So on this is there's a couple of pages in this document, but John McCone, as director of the Central Intelligence, and James Webb, director of NASA, were both addressees to this document. So they were told formally that to start planning to work with the Soviet Union. And Hugh Dryden, who was, I think he was deputy director of NASA at the time, was told to start working with the Soviet Academy of Science to develop plans for a joint lunar landing. And so that got the wheels in motion. On that same day, November 12th, 1963, another document. You see John McCone there. He was part of that, the distro list. And this other document that you're coming up to now was Memorandums Angleton, Director of Counterintelligence, and that's what that blacked out bit there. A lot of people thought this was to John McCone, but John McCone had already been notified through NASAM 271. And Timothy Cooper actually says this in an article that is actually the Director of Counterintelligence, Central Intelligence Agency. Same date, November 12th, 1963, marked as doesn't get put in official records. And this document surfaced in 1996, which was 6 years before NASAM 271 was declassified. So again, that's amazing. If it's a hoaxer, they've amazingly picked this date out of nowhere and got it right. And there's another document called NASAM 156. It's got the same typeset, same format, same classification markings. And that is a official declassified document. So it looks exactly like this one. So, this subject says, as I've discussed previously, which I believe this was after Angleton was forced to brief Kennedy after Bluegill Triple Prime, that he's instructed James Webb to develop a program with the Soviet Union, joint space and lunar exploration. It'd be very helpful if you could have the high threat cases reviewed, the purposes of identification of bona fide as opposed to classified CIA, USF sources. It is important that we make a clear distinction between the knowns and the unknowns in the event the Soviets try to mistake our extended cooperation as a cover for intelligence gathering for their defence and space program. So he's asking for a report. I would like you to arrange a program of data sharing with NASA where the unknowns are a factor. So he's saying that NASA has a defensive responsibility as well, and they need to know what what the unknown UFO object the CIA has records and the US Air Force have records of, so they can formulate a defensive plan as a response. And he's asking that Angleton deliver this no later than February 1st, 1964. So this surfaced April 1996. There's a gentleman that's quite notorious in the UFO circle named Gordon Novell. Gordon Novell was hung out with Johnson, apparently had plans or had seen the alien reproductive vehicle, the ARV. Gordon Novell stated that William Colby drowned in 3 feet of water, and if you scroll up a little bit there, you'll see there's some blacked out just on the lower part of that there. And that bottom bit has been blacked out, but whoever handed this to Timothy Cooper, or maybe it was Timothy Cooper, because I'm not sure why document to say and redact part of it. I think maybe Timothy Cooper redacted this himself, but then realised he over-redacted it and it's written in the margin there, response for Colby, Angleton has the directive on the 20th of November 1993. So that's this document's been bounced around Angleton's office. It's gone to Colby, gone to Helms. Colby's come back and said, well, James, you've got the MJ directive, you know what to do. It's quite clear. When this document surfaced in April 1996, William Colby drowned the next month, so a couple of weeks later. And Scotty Myler, in the important memo, another majestic document, says that was not a Colby was the only person named in this document that was still alive when it came out. James Angleton died in 1986, I believe, or 87. Colby was the only one that could have actually been hauled before a committee and asked about this. So I think he was eliminated before that, so he couldn't talk. Gordon Novell says, and that's what Scott Myler says.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments about this because I think this document is very critical, that Kennedy knew that it was actually the director of counterintelligence that had the control of the classified UFO files, not John McCone. That McCone was just kind of like filling in. And that this document is kind of like showing how it was Angleton that was really the focus of Kennedy's kind of like attempt to get to the bottom of this issue, and as you rightly explained, Angleton and Colby. Colby knew Angleton had the directives, and one of those directives was Project Environment that we already talked about as a cryptic assassination directive. And so, this, I mean, when I saw this, when I made that kind of connection between Project Environment and this, I mean, to me, this was like a smoking gun kind of like document that Kennedy was killed under the orders of the Majestic 12 group that had issued this cryptic assassination directive, Project Environment, back in 1961.
Yep, and that's what E. Howard Hunt told Douglas Caddy, his lawyer, the night before he went to prison for Watergate. Caddy asked him why was Kennedy assassinated, and Hunt said he was about to reveal our most vital secret to the Soviets. And Caddy said, and what was that, Howard? And Hunt said, the alien presence, and Duran walked away. That was it. So, yeah. And what else is interesting too is that the next document is a telex conversation between Khrushchev and Kennedy, which it's not, the hotline at that time 1963 was a telex system, used a Exeterum cipher system. The tapes, when they sent the telex tapes, was encrypted by this cipher system, and the key to decipher them were that tapes were delivered to the Soviet embassy. There was 2 copies printed, but I believe there was possibly 3, and the 3rd set was delivered to GHQ headquarters in London at by Holborn in the UK. That was the connection point between DC and Moscow, and that's that the Five Eyes used to get around the laws of a country, want to spy on, and it's come out in the Snowden leaks that the Allies share. If they want some dirt on their leader, they get their friends to do the dirty work, if you like.
So, I mean, just to kind of like bring a little levity into this, I mean, how does it work? I mean, is it like they get the Brits to spy on the Americans, who then spy on the all the others in the Five Eyes, and the Canadians get to spy on the Brits, and the Australians spy on the New Zealanders? I mean, how does it work?
Well, you could see that in the presidential election of 2016, where Alexander Downer got involved, and ballsed it up when they were trying to get some intel out of Donald Trump's one of his advisors, and completely stuffed it. And I think Downer was the ambassador or something in London at the time, and invited George Papadopoulos, I think his name was, to drinks. Had no, the Australian government had no real interest in there, unless they were actually trying to collect data for either Democrats or Republicans or whoever, so apparently it happens all the time. Because you're not circumventing any laws, and or your own laws, for that state, and because that intercept line had to go through London to get to Moscow, that's how the intelligence community kept tabs on what Kennedy was doing. And when they saw this telegram, it probably was the straw that broke the camel's back, basically.
Well, I know a lot of people,
and that was the same day.
I know there have been a lot of people that dismiss this NSA intercept of the hotline as a fake document and so forth. But your research shows that the dates on it match a number of critical things, and so is your conclusion that this hotline leaked Majestic document is genuine?
Yeah, I believe so. Yep. Yeah. And it makes sense. Kennedy's telling Khrushchev to try and do the same thing with his KGB agents and stuff like that. And Khrushchev says, I've really got no control over what they do, but I owe the world to try to, and they realised they nearly brought themselves to the brink of nuclear annihilation during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it was just a misunderstanding. So, that the military-industrial complex could see their gravy train of money, billions and perhaps trillions of dollars, grinding to a halt if this actually came to fruition. So that's where the MJ directive came in. Yeah.
So what is the significance, the overall significance of this hotline document, that it just kind of confirms some of the problems that Kennedy had in getting access to classified UFO files, and that and Khrushchev was having a similar problem?
I believe so, yeah. Sergei only, fairly recently in the 90s, said that his father was suffering the same sort of problems with the overarching KGB that kept taps on everyone, and against the same, they had a job. They didn't want to lose their job and go into some peaceful mission for lunar landing and cooperation in space. Khrushchev didn't last very long after Kennedy's assassination anyway. He was only a year or two and he was deposed. So, it's exactly what Eisenhower wanted, a military industrial complex.
Yeah, I mean, that is very interesting that, Kennedy gets assassinated in November 22nd, 1963, and I don't think it was a year, and then Khrushchev is removed from power. So was that really because you had, what we would call it today, or what is called today, the legacy group, or Majestic 12 in the US, and a similar thing in the Soviet Union, that they kind of like both agreed that, okay, we got to get rid of these people that want our countries to cooperate at a political level, at a geopolitical level. We want to keep the Cold War running because that gives us cover to kind of like do all the stuff we need to do.
Yeah, I believe so. And Lou Elizondo alluded to that today in Matt Ford on the Good Trouble show, that in the age of disclosure, there were about 27 members of a group that wanted to assassinate both Lou Elizondo and David Grush. And he didn't specifically say that MJ12 has morphed into a MJ27, but that's exactly what he inferred. The people pulling the strings back in are probably the ones still pulling the string.
So, in your view, who would be kind of like on this group of 27? I mean, if we look at the original composition of the Majestic 12 group, it had, I think, 4 people from the US military services. Then it had 4 people from the intelligence community, and then it had 4 people from the scientific establishment that made up the MJ12 group, and that's something that Stanton Friedman talked about in his expose on the MJ12 group. So now, if there's 27, and this is probably more international, do you have an idea of what would be the composition?
They would definitely not be politicians, because they're viewed as temporary employees. They're only maximum 8 years if they're a president. These people 30 to 40 lifers, basically, briefed in, and they stay in. In America, you can get executed for treason. So that's what you sign a document before you get briefed in. If you talk about any of this, you'll get executed. So it's irrelevant whether that happens in a federal court, in a gas chamber or electric chair, or a 30-cent bullet out on the street. And the problem is that those people know if they talk, they've pretty much agreed to let the government assassinate them from what they've signed. So, that's why it's so scary for them, right? Execution's execution, whether it's done legally or illegally. There's be an argument to say that they've saved a heap of money by just, a 9mm debrief to the back of the head rather than an electric chair or, going through the whole court process. So that's why people get scared when they, don't want to say too much, because that's the end result, is death, basically. And they've signed a document to say, yep, I agree. Now,
people have talked a lot about signing non-disclosure agreements, and non-disclosure agreements with corporations, or you're doing work for one of the military services in the US. They would be in alignment with the classification protocols of the military or the intelligence community, but a non-disclosure agreement which is based on a kind of the Department of Energy, where they have these more stringent requirements, and I think death is actually included in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is exactly how it's done.
Well, when I left the game, I didn't sign an NDA. They printed out the part of the Intelligence Services Act 2001 that related to me, and it was only one page, and they just said, read that. You understand the ramifications of it, and I signed it, and that was it. It's there. In Australia, the laws are that draconian that you can't even say who you work for or what you did, basically. So, and it's legislation. That's an act of parliament. So you just say, yep, I agree. That's it.
And did that document you signed, did that refer to death if you violated the
No, it's only the act of parliament. It just says that, I don't know, 2 years prison or 250 penalty points or something. But in America, it's different because they do have, the death penalty. So, and that's what they're signing. So, they may say non-disclosure agreement, but actually all they're saying is that they read and understand the relevant part of the US legislation that says they can be executed if they ever mention any of this. That's what they're signing. They say, yeah, I agree. And then once they talk, they're screwed, and they know it. And every waking second of their life is probably looking behind their back because they know it's coming, basically.
Well, a lot of people have been very interested in the Trump's effort to declassify all of the Kennedy assassination files, and I think most of them have been declassified, if not all. But of course, it's been over 60 years since it happened, and that gave the intelligence community enough time they needed to scrub the files of anything that was directly implicating the CIA in this. So, I mean, overall, do you find that the kind of like declassified JFK assassination files kind of give us answers to some kind of like, detailed questions in terms of personnel and situations and locations and some things like that, but that the kind of like smoking gun documents have been either not released or just destroyed?
Well, I think someone on the inside actually released that document that we opened the presentation with, because there is no explanatory file, saying why. There's no context why that was released. That was just put out there, and it does not make sense why all those people are bunched in a group from, the US military, the intelligence agencies, and from private aerospace industries, all had that briefing. So, that this is an Easter egg, I believe, from someone that's just put it out there. I haven't gone right through the list, but there's one female there. Her name's Hall. She was a famous spy. Virginia Hall. She was a famous spy that, they possibly briefed into. And funny thing was, she sort of left the spy game after in 1950, so maybe it messed with her head. I'm not sure, but there is a lot of disparate people in this list that don't make sense why they're on this list, and every single one of them is after 1947 or November 1947, which means to me, it's that National Security Act 1947 that was signed by Truman on the 24th of September 1947, which put into, and that's why I said the file is still classified. Over half of those 380 pages are classified by that National Security Act of 1947. There could not possibly be any left that needs to remain classified unless it's got something to do with MJ12 and reverse engineering programs, in my opinion. And I'd like an explanation of what this list represents. Because to me, it looks like a bigot list, and for people that don't know, a bigot list is a list of people that have the clearances and a real need to know to be briefed into the program. And the Wilson Davis memo in that on page 11, Admiral Thomas Wilson complains that he was trying to get into the legacy program and find out about it. And they said, even though he had all the right clearances, he calls them tickets, he had all tickets, but he didn't have a need to know, so he didn't make the bigot list. And that's what I believe this is, a bigot list of the Majestic Jehovah reverse engineering program.
Well, that's great. I hope you are able to find out more about this bigot list and its connection to the reverse engineering program. So what's next for you, Geoff?
Just keep plugging away, finding bits and pieces of information, trying to connect the dots. I usually post a lot of my findings on LinkedIn and, help, other people help join the dots. We're trying to convince the family of the diver that went down on the Blue Prime craft to come forward, because we've got dates of his service record, but I believe he was put in hospital for 18 months after the event, because when he went to touch the object, his hand actually went in and it was going to pull him in, and it severely affected him later in life. And surprisingly, one of the ships that he was on, it made an insignia in 1962 after that event of a hand. That was the ship's insignia, so that was another secret sort of Easter egg to anyone that knew about the background to that. So, yeah, we're going to try and push them. It's hard for the family, because I've contacted them and told them this amazing story of what this dive was involved in. The first time they hung up on me, and the second time they sort of listened and joined a lot of the dots. But it's hard for people that aren't into this subject, as you and I and others are. It's real. It's a reality, and it does shatter people's worldviews sometimes when they're faced with this reality.
Well, I want to thank you, Geoff, for coming on the show and giving us this really detailed look into some of the key documents associated with Kennedy's efforts to learn about the UFO issue and the key people around him that were involved in the assassination.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.